Neither city could escape or avoid the region's most catastrophic race riots, which were instances of ecological warfare because they erupted out of the jobs and housing competition. Chicago's deadly 1919 race riot erupted when young teenager Eugene Williams crossed an invisible line and ended up on the white side of the beach in Lake Michigan. White boys killed him for his alleged transgression. Later, officials speculated that the death toll of the Chicago riot of 1919 might have been greater had not black men, some of them recently returned from service in World War I, fought back. Dr. Ossian Sweet in Detroit fought back, but landed in jail and was defended by Clarence Darrow and NAACP lawyers when he tried to protect his family from an enraged mob outside of a home that he had purchased in a white neighborhood. In Chicago, Lorraine Hansberry would grow up to write a play that became the first play by an African-American woman to reach the Broadway stage, A Raisin in the Sun. It was a fictionalized account of her family's actual encounter with white resistance and violence when they tried to move into their newly purchased home in a white neighborhood on the South Side. 2 decades later, on June 20th, 1943, Detroit experienced one of the deadliest race riots in the nation's history, as I said before. Smoldering resentment and competition between white and black workers about jobs and housing was a ticking bomb. The immediate trigger was a squabble that quickly got out of hand between white and black bathers at the segregated beach on Belle Isle in the Detroit River. Rumors raged that a black woman and her baby had been thrown off the Belle Isle Bridge. And in the event, estimates of up to 6,000 federal troops were sent to Detroit to restore order. The violence left 34 people dead, 700 injured, 1,300 arrested. Of the 25 black lives lost, the police killed 17. Against a canvas of actual and potential interracial violence, visual artists, musicians, writers, and poets created both the Black Chicago Renaissance and the Black Arts Movement in Detroit. The cultural workers were concerned with developing and using their creative and artistic talents and skills to imagine black humanity and thus to change the subordinate status of black people in America. Black migrants. I'm jumping over some of this now in the interest of time. I want to get to make a second major point about the Great Migration and these renaissances, and that is that it would be the migrants' children. It's the second wave of people who populate the cities in the 30s and in the 40s who will become these great missionaries of culture. Sometimes we think about this migrant as an undifferentiated mass of people just moving from one location to another location. And what I'm trying to say is that in order to understand this Renaissance phenomenon, this drive to create new images of black people, you have to break it down by generations. And a lot of the people who in the 30s and in the 40s become these creative giants, if you will, both in Chicago and in Detroit, are actually the children and sometimes the grandchildren of black migrants. And with this generation, they're not so content to think that it's just enough to survive. It's not just about surviving in these cities. It's about transforming the space. It's about claiming ownership. It's about belonging. Stop longing to belong and just belong. And that's a whole different kind of consciousness that begins to develop and grow. So by the 1930s, let's say, Chicago was home to a cohort of creative artists. It was the second generation of young migrants, or the children of the migrants, who provided the energy, the drive, the creative excitement, and innovation of the Black Chicago Renaissance. To be sure, Chicago remained home to some of the Black refugees from the Harlem Renaissance. Their mentors were Arna Bontemps, Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, Horace Payton. They were influenced by the great Louis Armstrong and, of course, the Renaissance man incarnate, Gordon Parks. The Great Depression of the 1930s was both a blessing and a source of enormous suffering and pain. For a fortunate few creative artists, the Rosenwald Fellowships, the WPA subsidies, were lifesavers that helped them to produce impressive public art that was on display in homes and churches, libraries, universities, and government buildings. Two of the most important Black women culture workers in the middle of the century in Chicago were Margaret Taylor Gross Burroughs and Katherine Dunham. In 1934, Katherine Dunham established the Chicago Negro School of Ballet. Well, really, she was the founder of the modern Negro dance movement. But she and her pupils launched the Black modern dance movement, and while organizing a library for Providence Hospital, she contacted Melville Herskovitz, who was a professor over at Northwestern University, had written The Myth of the Negro Past, and she asked him for some donations to the library that was going to be in the Providence Hospital. You see how this theme of libraries and literacy is coming through again and again and again, and that's what Dudley Randall really captured when Black Detroit arts movement broke out, if you will, just broke out. It was because he knew that Black people needed to grab hold of literacy, publish their own works, speak in their own voice. That was what drove this man. I never met him, so I could only read between the lines of what he's writing and know that he's following in that tradition of the great Black librarian. And that what you do when you are a great Black librarian is that you do everything in your power to make your people read. You know, to just start them reading. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, just read. I get carried away. You would think that I was a librarian. I'm sorry. Let me get back to this. In any event, they were powerful. Let me talk about another period in Chicago